Welcome. Today I am going to be talking about the drug amphetamine and how it affects the body and its central nervous system. First, let's take a look at the dopamine signaling pathway and dopamine itself. Dopamine is a type of monoamine neurotransmitter and is the ligand of the process. It's made in the brain and acts as the chemical messenger communicating messages between neurons in your brain and the rest of your body. Dopamine is made up from the amino acid tyrosine and then is converted into L-dopa and finally through a process called decarboxylation is turned into dopamine. This process of making dopamine is made in the neuron. During the normal pathway, dopamine is already located in the neurons and is in its synaptic vesicles, and in low amounts is free-floating in the cytosol. The dopamine then travels through the synaptic vesicles and through the presynaptic membrane on the presynaptic neuron. The dopamine is then released from the neuron into the synaptic cleft, where it is then able to travel into other pre- or post-synaptic neurons, go through the dopamine transporter, or DAT to be short, and be in vesicles again, or bind to its correct receptors. There are 5 different types of dopamine receptors. However, this process focuses on D1 receptors. These receptors are G-protein coupled receptors, also known as GPCRs. Dopamine binds to the D1 receptors and activates the G-alpha S protein, which activates adenyl cyclase that turns ATP into cyclic AMP, which also happens to be the secondary messenger of this pathway. Finally, the cyclic AMP starts a protein kinase cascade that then activates other cellular responses. As a result of these cellular responses, they boost mood, boost the reward center, and increase attention span. Now let's see how amphetamine affects this pathway. Amphetamine is a type of central nervous system stimulant or drug. Amphetamine, or AMPH for short, enters the body through ingestion. It is absorbed by the small intestinal tract and enters the bloodstream, where it makes its way up to the brain and central nervous system. There are 2 main ways that amphetamine disrupts the dopamine pathway. The first way is with the inhibition of VMAT2. First, the amphetamines bind to the dopamine transporters DAT and make their way inside the presynaptic neuron. It is able to do this because of the similar shape and structure it has to dopamine. Once it enters the neuron, it inhibits the vesicular monoamine transporter 2, or VMAT2, and disrupts the proton gradient inside the vesicle. At the same time, amphetamine also inhibits MAO, or monoamine oxidase. MAO's job is to break down and regulate the monoamine neurotransmitters like dopamine. AMPH does this to slow the process of breaking down dopamine to increase dopamine levels inside the cytosol. The disrupting of the proton gradient inside the vesicle causes dopamine to leak out into the cytosol of the neuron. It makes the VMAT2 unable to perform its job of transporting dopamine into the synaptic cleft. Finally, amphetamine binds to the intracellular GPCR TAAR1. This causes the same phosphorylation into a protein kinase A cascade as previously mentioned. However, it also produces protein kinase C. Both of the protein kinases cause the reversal or dopamine efflux of the DAT to release dopamine back into the synaptic cleft. The second way that AMPH disrupts the dopamine pathway is without the inhibition of VMAT2. It still binds to the DAT and inhibits both the MAO and TAAR1. However, the vesicle is still able to perform its function since the proton gradient is not affected. Keep in mind that dopamine is constantly being made and is being transported in vesicles. The dopamine from both pathways bind to the dopamine receptors as previously mentioned and produce protein kinase A. The pKa is then able to go downstream and change ion-gated channels functions, which is crucial for cellular processes and functions. The excess amounts of dopamine leads to its transfer to other parts of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's center for high cognitive functions. Overall, amphetamine is a central nervous system stimulant found in medications such as Adderall and Vyvanse. However, these are both abused and addictive drugs that can lead to death if used incorrectly. Putting that aside, amphetamine is a relatively good drug that is used to help people with ADHD and narcolepsy increase their brain function, make them more aware, and boost their mood.